not cures for coronavirus. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Well, despite reassurances that the President is doing well, there is still a chance his condition could worsen. But how would his doctors deal with a scenario like that? Well, let's cross to Pittsburgh and speak to Dr. Amesh Adalja, a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Centre for Health Security. Thank you so much for coming on the programme.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So, we are talking first of all about someone's, personal health, and of course we should say right at the beginning that we wish a speedy recovery to the President. On the actual worst-case scenario of things deteriorating from here, what kind of symptoms will the doctors be looking for over the next couple of days?
The biggest symptom would be shortness of breath. Does the president have difficulty breathing? Does his oxygenation level fall? Does he require supplemental oxygen? That's the key pivot point when we're taking care of COVID patients, where somebody is getting in trouble. We know that somebody's getting in trouble when they start to become short of breath. Other things, you might look at the level of activity, the level of energy, the mental status. You also will look and see how well the fever curve is doing. Is this an unremitting fever, or is the fever being controlled? Is the president getting dehydrated because of the fever? All of that's going to be important to follow in the next couple of days.
Well, that's really interesting. What about the timeline here for most patients? Is there such thing as a typical timeline, starting with sore throat, cough or whatever, and developing? And what are the periods within that timeline to look out for?
The period where it's really critical is about a week or so into symptoms. That's when we see people, especially high-risk individuals like the president, get into trouble, where their immune system is kind of revving up and attacking the virus and causing a lot of damage to the lungs. So people might do well for the first couple of days at home, and then they start to get progressively short of breath, and then they show up at an emergency department and they need to be admitted. So that's kind of why we have to wait for probably this next 48 hours to know exactly what the president's trajectory will be, because he'll go into that critical period where his immune system is going to be reacting against the virus. Obviously, he's gotten some medications which has modulated that immune response, but I still think we have a little bit of time before we know exactly what the prognosis will be.
Well, that's fascinating. So you're basically saying it's frankly too early to say whether anyone is doing well or doing badly. It doesn't matter a great deal until we're into that critical period about a week on.
Yeah, it is. You can't say anything definitively. So far, so good. We know that the president has been hospitalized, so that itself is an indicator of severity. We know that he's gotten remdesivir and a Regeneron antibody cocktail, which also is a marker for severe infections. We don't give those to people with mild infections. But to say exactly what's going to happen, you have to give the virus and the immune system some time to do battle and then see what the result of that may be. So I do think we have to not be premature about saying that everything is clear yet.
Well, your explanation was certainly really clear, and we appreciate your time. Thank you very much, Doctor. That's Dr. Amesh Adalja. Now, it's not clear when or if Mr. Trump will be able to go back on the campaign trail. Meanwhile, his opponent, Joe Biden, who's tested negative for the virus, is continuing his rallies in swing states. With roughly a month to go until the election, let's look into how the president's illness is changing the campaigns for both parties. Well, joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Republican strategist Matt Terrell. Thanks very much for coming on the programme.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So this is just a huge moment in American politics, which could determine the future for years to come. And everything is now being thrown up in the air. This, first of all, will change, well, the operation on the ground for the president, isn't it?